So we've got both ends of the scale. We've got sort of the big companies, and we've got some smaller ones there. By default, though, most of the what you're going to see is going to come from the larger companies, primarily because these are the ones that we got the records for, and the small sort of industrial concerns very often didn't when they closed down, they didn't bother saving the records, which is a shame, really. But we'll go straight into it. And I think of all the photos we have in the archives, this one, it's a view of a workshop in the Victoria Steam Joinery in Chalford. Best demonstrates craftsmen at work. I know it's a wonderful picture there. Although joinery usually implies woodworking, these guys are working in metal, as well as the gate or railings, decorative material on the left-hand side, possibly arts and crafts. I found out that this joinery was being used as an arts and crafts workshop by some of the designers who we'll look at along the way. So moving on, agriculture engineers. So by late Victorian times, many small agricultural businesses existed around the country and the county. Most were originally blacksmiths, and they began to repair agricultural tools, make improvements to them. In addition, they would take an awful lot of other work, building, repairing carts, farm vehicles, making pumps, repairing steam engines, even repairing early cars, and making farm equipment. Some began to specialise as agricultural equipment dealers and agents. This is a lovely photograph of Felix Lacey and his let's say it's got his say of Felix and William there. That's Felix's wife there, I should say. And the Upthrop Ironworks of Cam, and this is a picture of it. You can just see the shop on the left-hand side there. The building is still there, but it's I think it's a motor car engineering unit there now instead. So agriculture had lots of inventors. There's a right for if you want to invent something, become an agricultural engineer. And of course, we had Edward Budding of Eastington and the Yorkshireman Richard Clyburn, both of whom worked for firms in the Stroud area. I'm sure you recognise the names. This is the Clyburn and Budding chaff cutter. It's a mechanical device for chopping up straw or hay into small pieces, so it's easier to be mixed with other feed for horses and cattle. And then also, this is an interesting one. This is the Ewley cultivator, designed by Clyburn and made by the Earl of Douce's Ewley Ironworks. It was a very advanced machine that produced even rows, and you could regulate the depth of these. And it also had, believe it or not, a paper printout showing what you had done. And thanks to CIA here for me, Radio 1988 for those pictures. Workman & Sons, they were based in Slimbridge, began in 1861 as a general engineering firm, but a lot of their business came from the local agriculture and farming sector. They also undertook metal casting for local companies, built supplied wood sawing machinery to firms, and for a time sold Garrett traction engines and serviced and repaired Sentinel steam lorries. But they became most famous for developing a range of mechanical mills and presses for cider making that really revolutionized apple juice extraction, and the company became famous because of this, and their products were sold globally, Jersey, Ireland, and even the USA, where they still, a lot of their machines are still being used today. Another one that fewer people have heard of is Kell&Co. These are actually one of the largest companies. This was a family-run iron foundry owned by Samuel Kell that was originally based in Ross, but in 1856, he moved to Barton Foundry in Gloucester, and they became a really noted manufacturer of seed drills, winnower machines, horse-drawn ploughs, chaff cutters, potato sorters, and lots of other sort of small mechanical farming implements. And you do find these ploughs surviving here and there. And post-World War II, the agricultural business declined, and in 1955, Kells joined the Helipebs group, and then moved into more industrial engineering, becoming a subcontractor and supplier to larger firms such as Feedering and Platt, GAC, and Rank Xerox, to name but a few. If you're lucky, you can still see these ploughs kicking around, although not in use, sadly. Another one, few people have heard us, but the Gloucester Incubator Co. This firm was a maker of famous egg incubators based in Woodchester, and they manufactured a range of paraffin and coal-heated egg incubators. I can get your teeth in today. Egg incubators and brooder stoves from the late 1800s onwards. Haven't found too much about them, to be honest. But the firm's premises were requisitioned in World War and but despite that, the company survived into the 1950s. And this is an example of one of their products. It's probably the Gloucester Junior model seen here. And these could hold like 390, 50 eggs. So they were good for the small scale egg production and also large scale. But the most impressive one, I couldn't get a photograph, was the Gloucester Mammoth incubator. And this could hold 6,000 eggs. Just think about that's a lot of eggs being incubated there. TW Smith & Sons, Cheltenham Limited. So they began at Leckhampton in 1841. Timber and builders merchants, but they grew to be one of the largest joiners in the UK with over 400 employees. And they became sort of famous for sectional buildings and factory equipment, but they moved into agricultural sector and made things such as gates, pig cots, chicken houses, and also the first deep bit of housing for poultry. And these are some adverts from a local Gloucestershire farming magazine, basically, of some of the stuff they made. And they're really good woodworking skills going on here. In 1927 they opened a new site in Worcester, and they stayed in Gloucester as well, and although the Gloucester site closed, the Worcester one remained a going concern until 2000. So they're a nice long-lived company. Moving on to the arts and crafts movement. So this began in the 1880s, really, and was associated with reform, ruralism, the garden city movement, and also the folk song revival. And it was all linked to this idea of the simple life, which I can't blame anybody for that, can you? And obviously, being far from polluted cities, the Cotswolds, with its remote hills and valleys and quiet stone villages were seen as ideal, became very attractive. 1871, William Morris and Dante Gabriel Rossetti jointly leased Kelmscott Manor near Lechlade as a rural retreat, and where they went, others followed. Gimson and Sidney and Ennis Barnsley, they moved to the South Cotswolds in 1893, while C.R. Ashby's Guild of Handicraft moved to Chipping Campden from London's East End in 1902. And the movement's legacy, although it's died now, it does include the Gloucestershire Guild of Craftsmen, and we're still running, and they're known throughout the world for high quality workmanship and simple designs. And we have some records from Ernest Gimson here. He was an English furniture designer and architect, described as the greatest of the English architect designers in this arts and craft movement. He moved to the Cotswolds in 1893 to live near nature, as he said. He settled at Primbury Park near Sapperton. And this is on the Cirencester estate, so he actually came under the patronage of the Bathurst family. And this is a lovely candle sconce in pierced brass that he's designed. In 1900, he set up a furniture workshop, first at Cirencester, then at Daneway House at Sapperton. And this made and designed all manner of things. This is part of a design for a stone fireplace. I love it, with this squirrel sat on an oak tree branch here. He also later built his own house. He stayed in the village in Sapperton until his death in 1919. Another one, Norman Jewson. He was an English architect, craftsman of the arts and crafts movement. He was a distinguished but younger member of the group, and he settled in Sapperton initially under the influence of Ernest Gimson. But though he designed and did lots of things, his repair of Tudor Alpen Manor, which he undertook in 1925 to 26, is often regarded as most representative successful work. And we do think of like heritage crafts being small things done on a tabletop, but we forget, there are also quite larger things going on. So repairs of buildings and designing of buildings. He actually survived into old age, and he brought their methods of working methods well into the second half of the 20th century. So he was quite a chap. This is just some of his designs. So there you got a wrought iron gate, top left. You got a pair of fire dogs, essentially, made of solid brass, and then he's got, there's a house he designed sort of thing. So the skill to be doing those different things is quite impressive. Peter Walls, so he was a Dutch arts and crafts cabinet maker, and he came over to England, became manager of Gimson's workshop, making furniture, turned chairs, and metalwork to his own designs, as well as those of Gimson's. And the furniture and craft work he produced, the workshop produced under his day-to-day supervision, was superb. And look at this, is a grand piano, which is designed by Norman Jewson, and it's sort of regarded as one of the supreme achievements of the arts and craft movement of the period. I mean, that beautiful inlay above the keys there, what an impressive thing this was. Walls died in 1937, and he's buried in the churchyard at Christ Church in Chalford. So you can still there. I've not been to the grave site. I'm quite interesting. Looking at aviation, obviously it was and still is a huge industry in the county, came to Gloucester in the early 1900s, and most early aviation firms failed, but larger firms took their place, including Rotel, Doughty, Smiths, H. Martins, GAC, Gloucester, Sperry's, Parnell. We're not going to look at these today, primarily because we're going to lure you in with a sort of a fishing hook here. So our November secrets revealed is going to be called Those Magnificent Men, all about flying and aviation in Gloucestershire, and it's ahead of our December Saturday event on the theme, which is Up in the Clouds. So there'll be, we'll be sort of flying and soaring amongst the records there when we'd run those. Basketry, so an enduring rural industry practiced since prehistory. And at the end process were the basket weavers, and these lovely set of photographs show some members of the Cale family. They were basket makers of Quedgeley. So Fred Cale is on the left, the older chap there with the moustache. He's sort of the dad of the thing, and his son Jack there with products that they made. I mean, there's chairs there, baskets, all sorts of things. Fred is actually making a putcher for a fish weir, and they made these, although to be honest that one looks like it might be an eel wheel, if you know what I mean. That's an eel trap essentially, but wonderful stuff, very enduring, and it's of course some of it is still made today, although not for industrial concerns really. So we forget that in addition to the basket makers, they had to get the materials. So there was a whole industry set up to men who managed, cut and dry the osiers, which are willow, as well as the hazel, rushes and reeds along the riverbanks. And if you have a look at the OS maps for the area, you can see both reeds and osiers shown on OS maps. So the top one here shows reeds, that's by Stonebench, and then the bottom one is the osiers. These are down by Minsterworth, and that's the Denny there at Minsterworth. So these are still there. And so the OS maps marked them differently so people could know what they were and where they were. Bell making. So bell making's been a Gloucester industry for over 1,000 years. The earliest known bell cast was in 890 in St Oswald's Priory. And this is the lovely release of 1303. It names Christiana the bell founder. She was the daughter of Hugh the bell founder, whose business was in Lower Westgate Street. But by 1304, this bell foundry has been run by Christiana, his daughter. So it's this great account of a woman in business. Not only was she in business, she inherited the business and was running it. We know that in 1346, John the Belter of Gloucester cast large bells for Ely Cathedral. So we must have been quite famous for this, for people in Ely to think, okay, there's that guy in Gloucester making bells, let's get him to make them. And in the 1500s, William Henshaw, who was 5 times mayor of Gloucester, he'd established a famous bell foundry, which has now given its name to the Lost Bell Walk in Gloucester. So again, it must have been quite an impressive set of foundries running around making these bells. The most famous bell founders were obviously the Ruddles, the family business. Between 1684 and 1835, they cast more than 5,000 bells. This one was cast by Abraham, our first Ruddle. There's like most families, they name their kids after the dad, so there's a couple of Abrahams. This was cast in 1710 for a church in Stone, Staffordshire, and it was rescued by the Civic Trust. It's now St Michael's Tower in Gloucester. There's 2 bells there, and you can actually, they've got lovely little felt mallets, so you can hit them and listen to the sound, and they sound beautiful. Ruddles was developed by, founded by Abraham. He developed a really unique method of tuning bells by turning them on a lathe rather than the traditional way of chipping bits of brass off with a chisel. So if you imagine this bell you can see here, this is about, it's almost sort of 2.5, 3 foot high. Cast in brass, it's about sort of 1.5 foot diameter. That's going to weigh quite a lot. So if you imagine putting that onto a lathe and turning it at a reasonable speed, just the associated machinery to do that must have been something else to see. Sadly, I don't think anything like that's ever survived. Ruddle, he was described as the greatest bell caster of his age, but he also cast other items. This is a lovely bronze mortar he cast and was sold on an antique site not so long ago. Most of our records relating to Ruddles come from parish accounts. Luckily, we've got lots of those, and they show expenditure on the bells. And this is a typical, it's an itemised receipt from Abraham Ruddle, the casting of 6 new bells for the parish of Bybury in 1973. The bill at the time came to £56 and 12 shillings, about 6.5 grand today. So, there was money to be made in bells. When Abraham died in 1735, the business continued in the family line, but in 1850, John, who's Abraham's great grandson, was declared bankrupt. But the foundry was bought by Mears and Steinbrink, who owned the Whitechapel Bell foundry, and another and Ruddles for another 20 years before closing in 1828. So blacksmiths, so most villages are local blacksmith for making repair ironwork and working as farriers. And these kind of images, the first one shows the wonderfully named Absalom Ford shoeing a horse at his forge in Chapel Street in Cam, and the bottom one is Bill Cleaton shoeing a horse at his forge in Clifford's Main near Newark about 1900. I love these photos, they're really nice. Because this industrialization, the number of motor vehicles increased, blacksmithing virtually died out. But although some farriers and smiths were able to transition into doing automobile repairs and everything, others didn't. But today, actually, blacksmithing has undergone quite a good resurgence, and there are lots of new smiths around now, and these are becoming artisans and artists who are specialized in the skill of blacksmithing but use the past techniques to make modern designs and modern art, really. And there are lots of these, and also they offer, a lot of them offer sort of experience days like that. There's a chap always at the Stride Saturday Market who does a really good trade and sells some lovely stuff there, so keep your eye out for them, because they are coming back, and it's a nice thing to have in the county. Boat building, so there are lots and lots of ships and boats built in the county. Usually these are done by shipwrights working on the riverbank shipyards. This is from Framalode here, and the infrastructure they required was actually very, very little. But other yards like this existed at Brockwere, Tewkesbury, Newnham, Gatcombe, and Lydney on the rivers. And it's just amazing that how they could build these ships with so little infrastructure around. In Gloucester, the Hipwood family built ships at a yard above Westgate Street, seen here, and also on Arley Island. And you can get the idea, that ship's going to be launched by sliding down the embankment into the water. And it's quite a large vessel. You can see there's a couple of men kicking around, very small by comparison. So boat building in Gloucester itself started in 1815 in the docks, when the docks opened, and also lasted until 1866, when the last ship built was a small twin-screw steamer called the La Belle Marie. This was launched by the company Pickersgill and Miller. The Belle Marie, what's left of her, is now at Brockwere. There's just a simple prop shaft on a wall nearby, so she was a lovely little ship. Pickersgill and Miller had yard on Bury Close before the dry dock and Alexandra warehouse was built, and then they had to move further down the canal. Edwin Clark, 1884, Edwin Clark set up an engineering business at Hope Mill in Stroud, and it soon began building boats at the Canal Ironworks on the Thames and Severn Canal. And this is a photograph of his house where he lived. The on to specialise in prefabricated craft, sent around the world as flat pack ones, basically. But they also built more conventional vessels. This is a still working Thames River steamer Henley, which is a beautiful boat, and I've ridden on her, and she's a magnificent. In 1894, they also began making steam engines. So this is from the Engineer magazine. This is a compound surface condensing launch engine. Not big, but enough to drive a boat like that. Sadly, in 1896, Edwin Clark died, and within 3 years, the company closed. They needed his to keep going, but all was not lost. This is lovely. This comes from the Heritage Steamboat Trust, and this shows the 35-foot launch Laputa besides the ironworks. This gives you an idea of what could be made from what is ostensibly a tiny little shed with an engineering workshop behind this. I love it. Really interesting. And this is the offset boiler and funnel there. This suggests it's a horizontal steam engine that's driving this craft. I'd love to know more about it, but we do know that this boat eventually went to a customer in Spain, so it's probably playing the Spanish rivers somewhere. But what a beautiful boat. So here we go, is Abdallah and Mitchell. So in 1900, Isaac J. Miller, who was a Manchester shipping broker, he took over the business of Edwin Clark and Co. when it hadn't been dispersed, and he took it over. Shortly afterwards, he effected a merger with Mitchell and Company, who were grey cloth merchants of Manchester. This is what a highly unlikely partnership resulted in actually what was the largest shipbuilding concern in the county of Gloucestershire. They made well over 100 vessels, mostly small steamers and launches, and the bulk of them were overseas. And this is just a couple of examples. The really elegant steam sort of yachts, really beautiful things they were. T.S. Gomez and some and Scott. So Thomas William Summers formed a partnership, and after they bought out William Savery's and Sons, and they continued the business under the name of T&W Summers. And lots of the records of Savery we can't find. There's not only snippets around, sadly. But Summers earned the class for high quality workmanship, careful design. But initially they were making machinery to produce linoleum. But then they branched out after the partnership was dissolved, and a chap called Charles Scott took over. And the firm became Summers and Scott. And you're thinking, okay, they're doing this, machines for linoleum, but within a couple of years, they were building large stern wheel boats. This is the Isabel here for river use, and I've not been able to find out where this boat went to. I mean, it looks like it's the classic sort of American stern paddle wheeler, but I just don't know where they went to. And this company continued in business, we know, to at least 1910. I'd love to find out more about these vessels. Moving on to sort of the B, we get boots for Monday. Now, bootmakers. There were over 150 boot shoemakers in Gloucestershire at the turn of last century. Interestingly, the word cobbler wasn't used, and this is because technically shoemakers crafted custom shoes, while cobblers were legally restricted only to repairing shoes. They couldn't make them, and today that's merged completely now. But with so much competition, those that advertise frequently use quasi-medical terms to help sell the wares. And this is an advert for Mr. Gascoigne Clare of Cheltenham, who is the most experienced anatomical bootmaker in Cheltenham. And they were boots were highly recommended by the medical profession and made to measure on sound hygienic principles, which I love. Great one, isn't it? But there are also run-of-the-mill bootmakers. Progress Bootworks in Cheltenham's Montpellier Street. Adcock's opened in the High Street in Cheltenham in 1875 and continued trading down the Bath Road in Cheltenham until 2021, and they've gone now, sadly. But Adcock's were noted for making clogs for brewery workers, and also the clogs, some of the clogs had a long leather leg for carriage washing. So you put these clogs on, and they're rather like sort of waders, I imagine, but the front things, just so you could wash without getting your trousers wet. So I think that's very, very interesting. Don't know much more about it, sadly. So one of most Cheltenham's famous stores, Stephen Simpson Shoemakers. These were actually founded in Leeds, 1834, and it was once one of the largest footwear manufacturers. It's a lot of boots, the Confederate Army in the US during the American Civil War. And the shop opened in Cheltenham in the 1870s and only closed in 2008. I'm sure many of us remember it. Breeches makers, so breeches article in clothing, covering the body from the waist down, separate coverings for each leg, stopping just below the knee, and they can be very, very comfortable. They were a standard item of men's clothing from the 1600s onwards, and though they fallen out of favour by the 1850s in favour of trousers, even in the 1890s there were still plenty of breeches makers, and this is a list from one of the Kelly's directories from 1897. It just gives you some of the ones that are in Gloucester. There's at least 10 or 12 people there. And the reason that they were no longer in general use, although there's still these breeches makers, because they were worn for lots of specialised purposes: horse riding, shooting, ceremonial uniforms, and upper class gatherings. Upper classes still wore a lot of breeches, so this was where these craftsmen were able to survive. Brickmaking took place in Bolton, Morton, Evesham, where you get the lighest group of clays coming to the surface, but also in the Forest of South Gloucestershire, where you get the Carboniferous clays outcropping. Brickworks are often identified on OS maps. This is just a couple of examples. This shows the Brockworth Brickworks and the Wallen Brickworks at Gloucester. There they go there. And then also the Stonehouse Brick and Tile Works down at Stonehouse. So you often get these marked up, and I don't know why they sort of did these. Probably because they wanted to identify the fact there are lots of clay pits around, and they named them. But you can see, again, they don't require a huge amount of infrastructure, but they do need quite a lot of land for digging things. The 1910 Kelly's Directory listed 25 county brickmaking companies, but we know there are many smaller ones. There are at least 15 existed around Stroud itself. Some of these would literally open up, go for a few years, then close. Some were even probably actually just opened up just to make a load of bricks for one building and then close. So there was lots of them going on around. And again, sadly, there's not a huge amount of records for these. Um, got a lovely picture of Canary Girl here. This is from the Family History Society, and of course, Canary Girls worked in munitions during World War manufacturing TNT, trinitrotoluene shells during the war. The nickname arose because exposure to TNT is toxic and could turn the skin orange yellow, reminiscent of the plumage of the canary. Locally, women worked in the National Filling Factory number 5 at Quedgeley, which was a 300-acre site that began in production in March 1917. Highly skilled job, potentially very dangerous. At its peak, the factory employed over 6,300 local people, of which 5,000 were women. So, quite an impressive setup. And that continued, although the factory stopped making munitions, it continued as an RAF maintenance unit. It's there until the 1970s, 1980s. Cartridge makers. So a cartridge is a round for a gun. It's a pre-assembled piece of ammunition, contains projectile, propellant, and ignition device, all made within a case that's designed to fit into the chamber of a breech-loading gun. Although you could make these at home, most were purchased from specialist tradesmen. This is Thomas Powell, the Fairford cartridge maker, and they had an assortment of various cartridge presses like the one you can see here to use. Prior to the 1860s, cartridges were made of thick paper. This is where our term cartridge paper comes from. But this was later replaced by thin metal casings, usually brass. But at the same time, the ignition device was often incorporated into the cartridge, making them fully self-contained, rather than you probably would have seen a shotgun cartridge today, rather like that, all contained all in one. Cheese making. So cheese commonplace on most farms, as cows were kept to supply local villages with milk, and the surplus was made into cheese to preserve it. And this is a lovely photograph taken in the 70s of cheese making at Old Court Farm down in Lower Stone. I wish there were more of these, but sadly there aren't. But 1850s, you get a shift into industrial cheese making. It began in the USA when you had assembly line cheese making, the lovely American cheese in a can, basically. And it turned what was a local centuries-old practice into a mass market commodity and it did drive huge improvements in food preservation, transportation, agricultural efficiency, and it shifted cheese away from being a seasonal village luxury. So at the start and the end of the season, you had your beautiful cheeses to a standardized global staple. So you get cheese being made, cheddar cheese being made everywhere, not just in cheddar, that sort of thing. It was also helped this process by the mass production of rennets in the 1860s and pure microbial cultures in the 1900s. And this has allowed factories to produce large, consistent batches of standardized cheese. Luckily today, there are still a few artists and cheesemakers going. Smarts is one, and I've forgotten the name of the other one. Smarts, the other one to make Martels make Gloucester cheeses, and technically they should only from Gloucester cattle, basically. But you are getting this is a craft idea that's come back and is now on the rise again, luckily. Because many cheesemakers are local, there are lots of different cheeses existed. We've got a lovely volume belonging to the Hyatt and Dickinson family, which is just listing preserving fruit and making cheese, and including making rennet. And it's written in the 1740s. It has over 20 cheeses inside. This is a typical one. This is a thick cheese. Once made, it's wrapped in cloth, and that cloth was changed every day for a month. And there are some wonderful hints and tips here. A lot of the cheeses, specific months and seasons they could be made. And if you have a look at the bottom of this one, it's got a lovely note saying, this cheese must not be made in June or July, for it will be maggoty if it's made in hot weather. So I hope nobody's making cheese this week at all locally.
Here's something.
A china and a glass riveter here. So this was a highly traditional, skilled artisanal job who repaired broken ceramics and glass. And these stitches of metals or wires to pin things together. It's something that doesn't exist really today. You break something, you throw it away. But back then, no, you try and restore it, try and save it. And the technique dates back centuries, where you'd actually involve drilling tiny blind holes in ceramic. And then you secure them with metal rivets. I mean, what a job! How effective it was, I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't think you could probably hold these things where they'd hold water anymore, something like that. But play it dry food, it would work. Repair. Cider making. So cider making was brought to Britain by the Normans. This was used in process actually based on olive oil pressing. And the earliest production was in the monasteries who had the land, knowledge and time to produce it. But post-dissolution, many itinerant monks turned to farms, continue their craft, and farmers began planting small orchards on their crafts for this very purpose. And these are kind of lovely pictures of apples being scratted at the top and then pressed at the bottom. You Scratching apples breaks them up, makes it easier for the press to press them, basically. So the top one, we don't know where it is. It's probably somewhere in Stride, and it's outside in the open. And the bottom one is a horse-powered cider mill. And if you want to see a horse-powered cider mill, head down to the folk at Gloucester when they do have their apple day, and they have the horse and they're crushing the cider apples in the mill they've got there. Oddly enough, though, the impetus for orchard planting was simply financial. Agricultural workers in the day could receive up to a third of their wages in the form of cider, thus saving farmer cash. It's much easier to have an expensive planting trees, and then you can pay your workers less money because you're giving them cider instead. And there was I think it's William Marshall writing in the 1750s, 1780s, something like that, saying that Gloucestershire agricultural labourers are mostly drunk because they drink so much cider. But there you go. Love these kind of adverts. The sheer quantities made in the county was awesome. From the Cheltenham here, 200 dozen bottles, bottled cider. Doesn't show how much they are, but basically it shows you sort of like how much they were costing per dozen. And this lovely poster from Dunny Farm, Minsterworth, basically 5,000 gallons of cider and perry. And how many trees would there be? That'd be amazing, really. Clog making, really unusual trade in Gloucestershire. It did take place in Colesbourne Park and a few places as well. These men in this picture are from Cheshire, and they were making clog soles for sale in Oldham, Lancashire. And if you look at the background, you see those packs of clog soles all ready to go. Clogs were made of soft, light woods such as alder, and unlike Dutch clogs, British clogs had wooden soles but leather uppers, which gave better comfort and a tighter fit for labourers. The clog makers were in Colesbourne basically because they were using alder trees, and the alder trees were found along the banks of the Churn there, and it was a very common tree in the Colesbourne estate, and they were basically rented into a financial arrangement with the Colesbourne estate people, just so they could actually sell, cut down the trees, sell them, process them, and give the estate some money. They also sold the actual remains of firewood as well. Cloth mill weavers. So these is a couple of pictures of mechanical carpet looms inside the mill of Champion and Hall carpet manufacturers in Dursley. This was originally a saddlery business, expanded into rope making, then moved into cloth and carpet production. These mechanical rooms still required a skilled workforce, and these workforce were mostly better off than hand room leavers, although they still work long hours in noisy, dangerous conditions for relatively little pay. And of course, the woolen trade was once the principal mechanised industry in Stride, simply because of the availability of water tower power, which could drive mill machinery. Although later, as we know, steam power took over this. Coppicing, so it's a traditional craft for woodland management. It relies on the ability of trees to regrow from the stump if cut down. In a coppice wood, and this was known as a copse, they're open. When young trees are repeatedly cut down to near ground level, and after a few years, depending on the species, usually it's from 7 to 20-ish, you can reharvest these and then grow again. And this is a little line from the Batsford estate accounts, which shows John Phillips being paid 10 shillings for half a day's coppicing. This was a skilled job because it's 5 times that of a labourer at the time. So this really was quite a skill. And if you can do coppicing today, it's going back into fashion again, and it's a really great day to spend in the woods coppicing. So what did it give you? Well, it provided raw material for fence staves or poles, firewood, which tended to be sold in bundles or faggots. This is the end small bits of the wood. Laths for making wattle. So you hear of wattle in daubs. So laths also were the basis for many houses for putting the plaster onto. Hurdles, pegs, thatching spars, tool handles, besom brooms, chairs and tables could all be made from the material produced by coppicing. Generally, These people were known as bodgers who made these, and these were often itinerant craftsmen who specialised in working green or unseasoned wood. And they would often set up in a little encampment in a wood they knew was going to be coppiced. This is an example, and basically work with the wood they had. And here you've got on this patch, you've got a horse, a chair, shave horse at the front, and you've got some lathes, pole lathes at the back. So again, they could set up, move all this quite quickly. And this is a lovely picture. This is John Evans of Amberley, circa 1865. He's a one-legged farmer, but we think he lost his leg. He probably we don't quite know what he's making. You can see it on the table at the back. There are some of the finished examples, and he's using what looks like a hollow blade razor to sharpen whatever he's making. He's got a leather sort of thing on his knee. I would like that myself to be. I'd like the knife to be a bit further back, but we're not sure what he's making. We've looked at various places and spoken to various people, like the Museum of English Rural Life. We can't identify what these things are. I suspect they're just probably big clothespins from an odd angle, but we'll never know, sadly. Corset makers, so obviously corsets to support garment worn to constrict the torso and to design shape and posture, to construct that fabric with whalebone or steel, stiff panels, and some sort of lacing that allows the garment to be tightened. And this photograph of the corset, I mean, the poor lady on the left, my God, that's ridiculous. Most were advertised with heavy hints at French haute couture. This is now for Maison Annette, and it's in Cheltenham. It's a typical sort of example. They're specialists in corsets and lingerie. Miss Froon here, she was an ex-employee of Mason and Annette, and she made a pair of corsets for 25 shillings. Now, not having bought a corset for a long, long time, I suspect this is particularly good value. 40 quid for two of them, that's quite good. But also they've specialised in surgical belts, usually for the men, this one, and things like that. Cutlers were skilled tradespeople who made, sells, repairs, knives, scissors, and other cutting instruments. The name comes from the French coutelier and the Latin culter, meaning knife. They generally operated from small commercial premises where they made, sold, and resharpened knives, scissors, and razors. And Edwardson, Green and Sons were gunsmiths. They supplied them, but they sharpened them. Whereas Williams and Co. in Cheltenham, they actually made their own stuff and also sharpened. So there again are quite a few firms here firms who did this sort of thing. Denture makers, so false for long history. They've been made from human and animal teeth, wood soaked stone, which is pagotite, ivory, animal horn, and porcelain. Today, they tend to be made of acrylic resin and other synthetic polymers. But initially, dentists like Boodle & Co. and gardeners here made false teeth. But as time passed, denturists and specialised commercial dental laboratories have taken over this role. So they are still made. You imagine the price has gone up a bit as well. But interestingly, dental usage is declining in the UK as dental care improves. Although whether it will be in another 50 years, I'm not sure. In the UK in 1968, almost 80% of those people aged 65 to 74 had no natural teeth. By 1998, it's fallen to 36%. I know my grandparents, when they got to the age of 21, they had all their teeth extracted, every single one, to dentures to fit in, because they knew over the years they'd give them pain and be expensive. So, how things have changed. Whether we're going to go back to that soon, I'm not sure. So looking at our mechanical engineers, so this is Savory's, I mentioned them earlier. 1851, William and James Savory opened the High Orchard Ironworks in Gloucester, but within 4 years they'd sort of fallen out, and each one had gone to make their own concerns. So William Savory and Sons became an engineering and millwright firm, but also iron and brass founders and boilermakers. A lot of these early engineers made sort of everything. Really everything they could, they would do. Savory's began to specialise in making iron wheels, but by 1957 they'd done steam engines, steam printing presses, and all manner of other things. In 1881, as we saw, the firm was purchased by T.W. Summers, who continued the business, and then later on meant Summers and Scott Spokemakers. And this is a lovely Savory and Son water wheel post slip. It doesn't run. Sadly, it's just there against the side of a house, and from what I've found out about the house, it was, they just found this mill wheel lying in the hedge essentially. I haven't got to which mill it came from. Possibly an early paper mill that posted it, but we're not sure. But it's a lovely big thing there. Fielding and Platt, so started in 1866 by two Lancashire men, Samuel Fielding and James Platt, initially making small engineering machines and components, but they branched out into larger items, gas and oil engines, iron steamships, and again one, the Sabrina, is still in use at the Thames, a bridge across the Severn at Gloucester docks, which was only replaced in 1962. In 1871, they began making Ralph Tweddle's portable hydraulic riveting machines, and followed also by other hydraulic machinery. And this gained them world renown, and their stuff was taken all around the world. Amazing machines that they were making. The firm was particularly noted for the quality and long life of their products and for also the care of their staff, and they remained in business until 2000. And if you're interested in Fielding and Platt, put Fielding and Platt into Google, and you'll find at the Fielding and Platt website, which was started a few years ago here, with lots of information about the company and about its sort of care of its staff. It's a real nice website. This is one of the oil engines of Fieldings can be seen at the Waterways Museum in Gloucester. I'm not sure how often it runs. I'm going to take a pot and see every Saturday, but I'm not sure. But you see it running, and it's absolutely beautiful machine. It's so good. It's got that beautiful rhythm and the sound of the old machinery, which you don't get with a modern like tractor diesel or anything. These are brilliant things. Gloucester Carriage and Wagon Company, founded in 1860, made goods wagons, passenger coaches, diesel, multiple units, electrical units, Vaux's CC going tram down in Brighton, which the tracks are still there, horse-drawn wagons, lots of other things. They supplied the original fleet of red trains for Toronto subway and also rolling stock for the underground. World War One, they made horse and railway ambulances, artillery limbers, aircraft wings. World War Two, they made Churchill tanks, complete ones. They were one of two companies in the UK that made complete Churchill tanks, and also some pivoting sections for the whale units in Mulberry Harbours. Got to find more information on that. Post-war, the company shrank. Manufacturing ceased in 1994, but I mean that was a massive concern, full of individual craftsmen, and it's a shame that we just can't do this stuff here anymore. Sissons & Co., firm established in 1889 when William Sisson took over the small marine engineering works of J.J. Seekings on the K Street Ironworks in Gloucester. And this is the case in point. We know literally next to nothing about Seekings, apart from a few adverts, but they were there, they were making stuff, and if only some of this stuff had been survived. Sissons specialised in the design and development of high-speed launch and marine engines, but also boilers, and they designed for all types of vessels using the Thames, Severn, and Lake Windermere, for example. And again, this is just some of the three photos of various engines I could find. They do have some down at the Waterways Museum in Gloucester, so pop and have a look. But William Sisson had a strong interest in technical education. The firm became quite famous not only for designing engineering equipment, but also for designing that equipment for educational purposes. So again, this is a classic idea. You're looking at the future of your business. You need to introduce people to it. Apprenticeships, that sort of thing, which again has only recently started to be done. In 1958, the firm Bellis & Morecambe, who interestingly had a link with Seekings, they acquired full control of Sissons & Co., and the Sissons name disappeared. Muirhill / Wingate. So Muirhill began in the 1920s as a general engineering firm based in Manchester. Excuse me. They specialised in products to expand the use of Fordson tractors, primarily bucket loaders, but in the 1930s they invented the dumper truck, which we all know and love today. 1959, they were taken over by the Wingate Group, and production moved to the former Wagon Works then at Gloucester, and under the name E. Boydell Limited, but they still trade as Muirhill. We've got quite a nice little archive of their material here. They made just a couple of examples from it. Corporation gains then continued and ensured had many different owners over the years, including Babcock, Wilcox, Sanderson, and many others. Sadly, they still do survive today as Lloyd Loaders MH Limited, so you can still get stuff for Wingate and Muirhill loaders. A.W. Hawksey Limited. So this was a company whose name was a contraction of Armstrong, Whitworth, Hawker Siddeley, and it was formed in 1940 by Hawker Siddeley primarily just to make Albemarle bombers, the picture you see there, for World War II. These were to be sent to the Bentham JC Shadow factory, but in the end most were made elsewhere, and this site was used as an experimental design office in the factory. And interesting, a lot of work on the jet-powered Gloucester E28 1939, and also the Gloucester Meteor was undertaken there. Sadly, there's nothing left of that now. It's an estate. Post-war, Hawksley switched to supplying prefab bungalows to the Ministry of Works, and they were making upwards of 5,000 a year before, during the Korean War, production switched back to aero engines. Now, just show the logistics of making buildings like that, switching to making engines is massive. And how did it work? I don't know. But post-career, they went back to prefab. So, incredible switch around. Sadly, manufacturing ceased in 1959 when the site was sold to British nylon spinners, aka ICI, and DuPont now, isn't it, I think. Lovely picture. Carlton Green, he worked in the light machine shop at Fielding Platt from 1972. And I like it. Carlton was born in Jamaica in 1936, came to the UK when he was 21, attended Gloucester Technical, became an operator at J.H. Daniels in Stroud, then began working in Fielding and Platt, operating all manner of specialist machineries. And we do tend to forget that all the things we've seen being made needed machinists and engineers to make them, and they were skilled men. Carlton here's using the bore gauge to just check the inside of a bore that he's machined out on the lathe, and you forget that even today this sort of thing is going on, like in Doubters and places like that. The machine there is a Ward 7 capstan lathe, the lathe fanatics amongst us. This is a very specialist machine, and once it was set up manually, you could literally just reload it and it would push a button, it would make exactly what you'd made at the start. Fantastic machine, and again, you need to be a very skilled machinist to use them. Fishing tackle manufacturers. So from the late 1700s, demand for fishing tackle, initially for the upper classes, but then for the sort of the lower classes of angler, began to increase. And there were several tackle makers set up in the area to take advantage. Ogden and Sons here had 2 stores in Cheltenham, amazingly. Powell Thomas, remember him? He also made cartridges at Fairford. Tamlin, he was a noted local tackle dealer in the first quarter of 1900s, making rods, reels, and all other paraphernalia for anglers. And again, he often had these lovely little adverts just saying, basically, I am the world's best, come and buy from me. So they're very good. A furrier. These are a skilled professional craftsperson who design, make repairs, and sells garments and accessories made from animal fur. As might be expected, Cheltenham, being quite a posh place, had 2 furriers and several shops selling fur garments. But oddly enough, real fur requires actually highly specific techniques to cut, sew, and maintain. So furriers are essential for the upkeep and repair of these sort of garments. And this is an advert for Jacob Smith, the People's Furriers. This is an example. Another one, this is the blouse shop. Sanderson's fur coat cost 5.5 guineas, about £168 today. And was a mix of coney seal and skunk. Coney seal was actually rabbit fur. It was called seal fur because people just think of it coming off baby seals, oddly enough. Skunk fur, well, all you can say is let's hope it's washed and well clean, because skunk is quite powerful. This was the Vanderplank family, operated a well-known bespoke tailor and fashion outfitters in Cheltenham High Street. Furs were a speciality, but they weren't making the furs there. Well, they were, some of them, but the family members of Vanderplanks actually served apprenticeships at Harrods in London, where they mastered and passed that in millinery dressmaking and fine tailoring. And so they subsequently moved to Cheltenham, set up a shop, and acted as agents for Harrods at the Cheltenham shop. It's a bit like Cavendish House and everything. Glass making began in Gloucestershire, 1500s, 1600s. Glass houses were found at Tainton, Woodchester, Newnham, and later at Gloucester Quay, mostly set up by Huguenot glassmakers fleeing the continent. And they typically used what they called pot kilns. These usually have 3 furnaces, one holding the crucible to keep the glass molten. One was called a glory hole, used to reheat the glass during working. And lastly, there is a leer or an annealer used to slowly cool the glass. If you cooled it too quickly, it cracked, basically. So I had to cool it slowly in temperature. And one of the reasons for the trade coming to the county was in 1615, wood was banned from glass making. So the industry gravitated towards areas where there was coal. And of course, in the Gloucester, you've got the Farsley coal set up there. Gloucester's glassmaking began in the early 1720s. We have this picture of the glass house at the quay, and there's one North Foreign Bridge there. Again, we don't know a huge amount about it, although it does crop up on a lot of maps. We know that by Sykes making bottles, pickling, and butter pots, and these lovely melon glasses, but production sort of ended in 1744 and was never restarted, as far as I'm aware. So interesting, in the archive of the Forestine Ironmaster David Mushet, there is a letter from a James Revitt of Old Gravel Lane to Thomas Halford from 1811. Quite why Mushet got involved, we don't know, but it involves this drawing of a frit arch furnace. Excuse me. A frit arch was the type of furnace that melts powdery materials to a liquid state and was used to refine glass during the glass making process. Quite why, whether Mushet was thinking of expanding into this or using the designs for something we don't know, sadly. Gunsmiths. So, though Gloucestershire, I say, wasn't a great gun centre like Birmingham was, there were several gunsmiths around, all of whom made guns, but also acted as agents for larger gun makers, as well as repairing guns and selling ammunition. This is kind of adverts for Edwards and Green and Sons, who had shops in Cheltenham and Gloucester, and of course, all these guns were available without license. You could just go and buy them, and the prices are quite impressive. 50, 60 gunners. This one is for officers models. So this is the start of World War II. While the bottom one was just sort of sporting guns, really. 12 and 6. Not bad. Hedging. So after enclosure began dividing up the countryside, hedge laying was a vital task. And hedge laying became a skilled seasonal job that created basically solid livestock-proof hedges, which also promoted hedge growth. And this is the bill for hedging from James Aggs Hewlett's estate in Cheltenham. Hedging declined after World War II due to the availability and the cost of labour, the introduction also of tractor-powered chain flails for cutting hedges, and also cheap wire fencing. Chain flailing is dreadful for a hedge. It's really bad because it just trashes the hedge. So if you do chain flail a hedge, eventually you have to put a wire fence. But today, hedge laying's making a comeback. Although it's expensive because it requires a skilled craft person, hedges still define our countryside and are vitally important as a wildlife for a refuge, food, and also as corridors from which they can move through the landscape. So hopefully we'll see more hedging, and there's nothing more beautiful than a freshly laid hedge. It really is a work of art. So where you get hedge laying, you need hedgers. And this is the hedge laying instruction class at Bisley, organised by the Stroud District Young Farmers, 1936. All the tools of the trade here, bullocks, billocks, axes and slashers. And it's basically they're going to fight off the zombie hordes here, aren't they? But notably, they also have really good protection, stout leather, gloves, thick coats, good boots and everything, stout gloves. And anybody who's ever been impaled by a hawthorn spike will know you need protection if you do anything like this. Knife and scissor sharpeners. So whereas cutlers were from commercial premises, knife and scissor sharpeners tended to be itinerant craftsmen operate from a mobile cart that carried their tools. They covered a little niche in urban crafts that needed a level of skill but wasn't sufficient enough to make a living out of it in an urban environment. So they travelled around and they remained important to the middle of the 20th century. And now they're also, felt enough, coming back into fashion. You can still find often you'll see at garden centres, bring your kit here, there's a sharpener in place in 2 weeks' time, etc., etc. Some fixed cutlers, however, also offer this again. Edwin Green and Sons, we've seen the gun makers. They're on about resharpening razors. Don't send them away. Send the blades to us, and they resharpen them. Skilled job. Lime burning. So Gloucestershire is rich in limestones. You've got the Jurassic oolites and the Cotswolds, the Carboniferous limestones of the forest of South Gloucester. And lime burning, very important industry. So basically, to make lime, you heat it in high temperatures in lime kilns. There's a couple of processes involved, but the end result is a sort of quick lime. It's a white, very caustic alkaline substance which could be used in mortar, plaster, wine wash, to soil conditioner. Lime kilns, very nice, typically built onto a hillside, so you could pour limestone on the top and rake out quick lime at the bottom. And it's just a picture of some remains of lime kilns that you can find around the county at Lidbrook, Longhope, and Leckhampton Quarry in Cheltenham. Pin making. So one of the main trades in Gloucester was pin making, with pins being made by hand from the 1500s to the 1800s, and it's quite a complex process. It involves all these techniques. So it was again a skilled process. By 1735, Gloucester was the largest pin-making centre in Britain. Over 1,200 men were employed. Some were paupers, and they were essentially employed by a pin maker called John Tilsley via an agreement with the City Corporation. He basically said to the corporation, "I'll give you this much money if you give me these workers so I can work them to make pins." 1734, William Couch set up a film factory, which is now the Folk Museum. 1853 was taken over by the famous Birmingham firm Kirby and Co. It was become known as Couch Kirby, Beard and Tovey. Major advance came in the 1800s when the firm began using machinery to make pins. These would straighten and draw the wire, grind the points. But by the 1820s, quite soon afterwards, fully automatic pin making machines were introduced. They used to make 40 to 50 pins a minute, even in the 1820s. Incredible. But they still needed a craftsman to set the machine up and operate it. If we look at the hand loom weavers, so these were the backbone of textile production, operating out of homes and small workshops, and they defined local economies until the agricultural revolution, when the rise of the mechanized power looms began a transition into factories. Hand loom weavers looked long hours for little pay, and employment was like a modern day 0 hours working, really. Sometimes they would have work, sometimes they wouldn't. And this is the famous Arlington Row at Bybury, originally a wool store. However, it was converted into 7 small cottages with attics for tenant hand loom weavers. And this was typical sort of hand weaver work housing. Today, hand loom tradition is kept alive by hobbyist organisations. This is from the Doughty collection, believe it or not, the Cheltenham Hand Loom Weavers, seen here at an exhibition in sort of 1938, we think. The group formally closed in 1940, but it was a member of the Gloucestershire Guild of Weavers, Spinners and Dyers, and that organisation is still active today, so it is being maintained in the county. We had 3 motorcycle manufacturers in the county: Cotton, Bourne and Douglas. Cotton's basically from Bristol Road, Gloucester, traded until 1980. Bourne was a cycle car and motorcycle maker, came into Stroud in 21 and made cycles until 1936, when it switched to general aviation and plastics. Didn't close till 223. That's a long way. Got an extra O in there. Douglas of Kingswood, Bristol, built motorcycles and speedway machines as well as cars until 1957. And again, these haven't left a huge amount of records behind, sadly. Rick maker. So after haymaking and harvest, dried hay and cut straw were made into ricks for storage. Ricks were more than just parts of dry vegetation. They were meticulously built, either round or rectangular structures that were stable and water resistant. While farm labourers could stack the hay, thatchers were employed to manage construction of the ricks and to cover the tops with thatch to make the ricks waterproof. And they were designed to be opened by slicing. And this can be seen in this picture of a rick we have in Chase Farm, Charonworth. You see that flat face there? That's basically the ladder there. The farmer goes up and uses a big hay knife to literally cut off slices of the rick. This maintains its watertight integrity on the other sides. So again, fascinating thing. They also usually thatched with horizontal spars here, hazel rods, and you can see it in this picture of behind the traction engine, which is baling here. Sausage makers, who doesn't like sausages? Snorkers, good old snorkers. In the past, butchers would all make their own sausages. This is an advert from F. Beckinsale and Sons for their Cheltenham sausage. Denotes the high quality of the ingredients, all for 8p a pound, about £2.61 today, sort of thing. It's a great one. Post-World War II, of course, industrialised commercial sausage came before, but again, luckily, homemade sausages and farmhouse sausages are making a strong comeback. Go and try, after that, promote here. The Farmhouse Delis, Gloucester chips are a great example. Others are obviously available. This is an interesting one. Shave spiral maker. I had to do a lot of research to find out what this was. A shave maker was actually somebody who made wooden draw knives or spoke shaves used for woodworking. This is an example of them. They're great tools to use. But spiles are used for wooden venting pegs used in cast ale conditioning, or small little hollow tubes hammered into trees to collect sap. And you think, wow, it's actually somebody making these things in Gloucestershire. Are they actually? Was the demand high? Well, you can imagine it would be for the spoke shaves, but maybe not for the spiles. But again, shirt makers. Gentlemen shirt makers cater for all sorts of life, usually operate from premises. This is Thomas H. Salisbury's advert, gentleman shirt maker, hosier and hatter. In 1897, the Kelly's director only listed 10 shirt makers, over 300 tailors. Not sure what the distinction is. Thatchings are more common in the Vale as in the Cotswold and Dean roof stone slates sort of thing. This is a folk process showing the Frampton or Seven Tithe barn in the first process, which is removing the old thatch and seeing the amount of material it uses. This is a picture of a cottage on Sanager Lane down at Sharp Nest, which is thatched, and obviously it's coming up time to have it rethatched. There's a lot of growth on that thatch. Walking sticks and umbrellas. So, of course, in the valleys of cloth and textile mills of Australia, you get this thriving industry making and selling walking sticks and umbrellas. And these, again, were exported all around the world. The industry used local beech woods for sticks and also plastics, notably from the local form Aeronoids, for handles. And this is a picture from the Australia Museum in the park with some of their handles and sticks that they have. And the decline of the wool industry meant that there was plenty of cheap labour and plenty of cloth mills to accommodate the growth of stick making. So it became quite famous there in Australia. And by the early 1900s, there were more than 20 mills in the Australia area making these things. But from the 1920s onwards, walking sticks and parasols became less fashionable and the industry slowly declined. But this is another one that's making a little artisanal comeback, especially walking sticks. I love this photo. These are the employees of the Chalford Stick Company Limited outside the factory at St Mary's Mill. That lovely picture of group of workers, men and women there, and some younger people. Some stick factories were huge. This is AC Harrison's and Co. site at Bliss Mills in Chalford, opened around 1850 by a walking stick entrepreneur. And look at the size. That's quite a big building and a lot of work going on here. Watchmakers, 1897, there are about 150 watch and clock makers. One of the oldest was Waite & Sons, opened in 1804. In 1922, they bought RF Beards. They took the name, moved to Promenade, and they still trade there today. This 10 and 6 watch cost about £20, and it extra postage and packing on top of it. And again, lots of these adverts you can find in the newspapers of the day. This is the New English Astral watch, sold by Waite's, made by Sam Smith, the watch chronometer and instrument company, whose company moved from London to Cheltenham, making aircraft thing. And again, there's a lot of advertising here. This is for the brave defence of the country. You must have a watch or buy one of ours, basically. And I quite like this bit. The military use of radium in timepieces brought the idea of self-illuminating watches and clocks to the market. Waite & Sons were innovators in this and providing this amazing improvement in watches from 21 shillings to £4. £82 to £370. However, radium emits alpha and gamma radiation. It's not the best thing to wear on your wrist at night or have it near your head. Although you did get a little booklet here that run wonders of radium, sort of thing. And again, even today, because radium's got a 1600-year-old half-life, these vintage timepieces are quite risky. My dad's had a scuba diving watch with radium on it, and when I wore it to school once, we were doing physics, we were doing radiation. The teacher couldn't figure out why the Geiger counter was going berserk, and it turned out to be my dad's watch that I had on the wrist. So now that's safely tucked away. Wood carvers, so prior to the invention of powered routers, any sort of carving undertaken by hand was a skilled trade. Lots of wooden mouldings were made. Victorian architects usually hiding joints and things. So you needed a massive business for these people to do this sort of thing. 18 Henry Martin founded a firm of stone marble wood carvers at St End works in Cheltenham, went on to become world famous. World War I diversified into aircraft production, was later responsible for the creation of the Gloucestershire Aircraft Company. By 1920, employed over 1,000 men and women and remained Cheltenham's biggest employer for many years. And this is the view inside the aircraft shop there. And finally, coming up to the end, here are some trades we're glad to see the back of today. Tripe dressers. I don't know how many people eat tripe. My mum used to cook it for my dad once a year. The place was vile. Catgut manufacturers, often Staverton. Why Staverton? And then obviously castrators. Obviously, castrators are not for males, although I know a few ladies will probably suggest it. These are for animals. And that's the end of the talk. I've gone on a bit long today. I hope you've enjoyed it. But don't forget, our next event at the Heritage Hub is our Heritage Matters Day, focused on all things heritage. We've got 2 talks, one on the history of Berkeley Castle by the Castle Archivist Karen Davison, and a repeat of this humble offering, I'm afraid. As well as that, we've got lots of heritage organisation stands, film shorts, documentary exhibitions, workshops on photography and stained glass making. And our next Secrets Revealed talk, 22nd of July, is on Treading the Silver Screen, Gloucestershire's theatres and picture houses. A look at some of the old picture houses and theatres that once existed around the county and some of the advertising and films and shows that they did. And on that note, Gemma, I will hand back over to you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, John. That was really great. As we are a little bit out of time, I'm not going to take any comments but just to say, if you do have any, please email them in to us and we will get back to you. Thank you everybody for joining us today. Thank you very much, John, for such a fascinating talk, and we hope to see you again soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Bye-bye.